Crestone has changed so dramatically in the last, well, since the 1970s. And prior to that, it was ranching was a primary focus here. And in the town itself, which was very small, everyone worked on the ranch. And the ranch was owned by pretty wealthy people, and the people in the town weren't even allowed on the ranch. So this town, unless you worked on the ranch, you could go there when you worked, but even your family wasn't allowed to hunt or fish or go out there. So the town itself was a very, very tiny, not only in population, but geographically, it was very small. And virtually everyone in this town was related. And then when the development came in the 1970s, it was a whole new thing, a whole new world for this very tiny group. But the people who were here actually, although they were afraid a little bit of these hippies, and they were all considered hippies that were coming to town, they also knew that this town would die unless something changed. All of the children, like people my age, were all leaving. Nobody stayed in the town. Only a couple people remained. And they knew that change was inevitable, and they were scared of it, but they knew it had to happen. And they basically welcomed it.
So what was your first memory in Crestone that you can really remember? You must have been small.
My first memories are big family gatherings at my grandmother's house. And it was Sunday dinner. Every Sunday dinner there was fried chicken, and everything involved a lot about eating and meals. And people were poor, and they appreciated good meals. And the other thing, my earliest memories are people sitting on porches, loving looking at the mountain. They'd grown up here, they lived here their whole life, and people loved to look at the mountain and be outside. There's a tremendous appreciation for the place and the people. Although there were a lot of little squabbles in this town from the very early days, kind of Hatfield and McCoy kind of family squabbles. But everyone, they loved the place. And there weren't, you weren't doing things, you were just being with family and being in this beautiful place.
So I know your grandmother's house is down there at the corner, and then it has the street just coming to where we are now. Is that about the size of it back then? Did it go out that way towards the cemetery more, or did it feel like a really small town where the neighbors all knew each other?
Well, the town has not changed much. I mean, there's a few new houses on the outskirts of the city limits, but the heart of the town is very similar to what it was. And up until the recent redevelopment projects, this town really hadn't changed much in all those years.
So when you walk around and you see the houses, do they look familiar to when you were smaller, or does it look a lot different?
They're not being well taken care of. When I was a little girl, every woman had a flower garden and a vegetable garden. There were no deer in town because they were eaten. They didn't exist in the town. So everyone had these beautiful flower gardens, beautiful vegetable gardens, and the native grass at that time, because it was much wetter here and much more lush, the native grass, if you just mowed it, you had a beautiful lawn. And every little house had a beautiful little lawn and a flower garden and a vegetable garden, and it was a very clean and neat little town.
How were the mosquitoes back then?
The mosquitoes.
Do you remember the mosquitoes?
There weren't many mosquitoes. Most of the time growing up, unless you went to a picnic along North Crestone in the evening, or you were along a little ditch late at night, you'd have mosquitoes. But the rest of the time you didn't. And it wasn't until very recently, in the last decade, that we started having these ridiculous mosquitoes.
So people were into hanging out and having dinner and just socializing. We do it now with different things in the Baca Park,
Sure.
but you get very different groups showing up to those things. Do you picture the community being able to get together now like it did back then? I've seen some 4th of Julys here that it seemed like every single person in the town was here, and those are really cool.
Yeah.
Do you see it?
I think it's possible. I think when you have the diversity we have and just increases in numbers, it changes it. You know, when you have just extended family, then if there's a funeral, a wedding, something, you have all these people together, in part because they were related. And now we have a lot of diversity, and it makes a change. And I think it's something that's important to always come back to our common ground, you know, which is the beautiful place and the reason that we're all here.
When there's so many family gatherings back then, not many people are related in Crestone anymore.
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
Even geographically, where people come from, it's all over the place. So many people from New Jersey.
We have a very diverse, very fascinatingly diverse population now. Not ethnically, I mean, we don't have the diversity in terms of color, but in terms of religions and cultural experience, we have tremendous diversity. And it's important to keep going back to some of those old time, we're all one family, whether or not we're biologically related.
Do you have a favorite story from the past of something our relatives did?
You know, I think it's not a story, it's just a feeling and an experience that people loved the place. Everybody was outside. Everybody fished, whether you were a girl or a boy, everybody hunted. And in fact, my sister and I my dad would drive a Jeep up the spillway, which is the road to North Crestone. And my sister and I would get off the Jeep and we'd go out in the bush and we'd scare up rabbits and he would shoot them. And that was our dinner. And it was a very real life experience. But everything was outdoors, everything was the environment. We had very limited TV because the TV reception was from Albuquerque. Even
in the 80s, I remember that.
It was not good. So it wasn't an inside, you know, no computers, no any of that. Our phones, when I was little, were still crank phones. And my grandmother's was a long and a short with a party line. And and the lady in Moffat, the telephone lady, didn't like anything after about 5 o'clock. So it had to be very important for you to get the lady, the operator, to put your call through. And you would ring, like your phone would ring, and like 4 other people would pick up to listen to what was going on. This is a silly thing, but one of my favorite times when I was little, my grandmother still had an outhouse, excuse me, a two-holer outhouse. And so you just go out and you sit down with somebody and you just chat away.
Right next to them?
Yeah, it was 2 holes. And especially at night or something, you know, and we all had, and there were chamber pots still under the bed. So at night you could just use a chamber pot. And they lived a way that when I was a girl, they were still living like they had lived many years before. But it was wonderful because it was so basic. You know, it was so about just living and enjoying family and enjoying just the beauty of where you lived.
What years was that?
This would have been from the 50s until, well, the change was really in the 70s, I think.
But you being a child here was in the 50s?
50s and 60s. And then I wound up actually graduating from high school in Boulder. And then I went to college and law school and all of that, and then came back about 20 years ago.
And how many people lived here in the 50s?
It was, wow, I'm not sure. It was probably 50 to 70. And that was it.
Did you get tourists?
Pardon me?
Did you get tourists?
What happened in those days, the hunting and the fishing and the climbing was super big. From people would come here to do the 14ers, and they climbed. Right now they climb from the other side of the peaks. Back then they used to climb from this side. And like in the 70s, Outward Bound, I think it was the 70s, Outward Bound had a place here. Boy Scouts used to have a thing up North Crestone, and you know there used to be groups that would come here. Not a whole lot of people knew about the place, and there wasn't anywhere to stay really or eat, so that kept the tourists kind of minimal.
You still see the cabin at Burnt Gulch, Boy Scout cabin. That one's in still pretty good shape.
Yeah. But it was different. You know, the little store was a gas station, and you could get candy and pop. But everybody went to Moosey, which is what Alamos was called, or Beauty, which was Buena Vista.
So is that how you shopped?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone had freezers, and extra refrigerators. And I still in my house have 2 freezers and 2 refrigerators from the old days. But they would shop, and meat was basically what people shot. In fact, I didn't realize till I was a later teening that vacation for your dad wasn't when everybody did something. It was when your father got all the food for the year. And my dad would go out and get antelope and deer, elk, pheasant, rabbit, all of that. The freezer got filled up, and then that's what you lived on for the year.
He still did that through the 80s. I remember opening up a freezer, and that was a scary thing to do at his house. You don't know what you're looking for.
And so this is your parents, and who are they?
Bob and Eileen Sizemore were my parents.
Mm-hmm.
My father was the youngest of 6 children, and the family name Sizemore. There's a lot of Sizemores here. And my great-grandfather actually brought my grandmother here in a covered wagon from Missouri. And she and her sister came, and those 2 girls then had a lot of children that kind of populated the town after that. And that's why a lot of people here are related.
Most of my stories come from your dad. Who is Bob of Bob's?
Oh, yes.
All right.
Bob's Diner.
It's Bob's place because we thought it would be a place Bob would love. Good food. And they grew up in the Depression, and this Depression here was very serious. People had no food, no heat. They would burn cow patties and Chico, and the stories of those days were pretty dramatic.
Would Johnny remember that?
Pardon me?
Would Johnny remember that?
Johnny Hayes?
Mm-hmm.
He's a little younger than my dad, so I'm not sure.
Because that was the 30s? The Depression?
The 20s.
20s?
1920s. But it was very devastating down here. These were poor people. Almost everybody here, they were ranch workers and they were poor.
Well, and your great-grandmother raised how many kids by herself? In
My
that Depression? Yeah, or grandmother?
Yeah, my grandmother raised 6 kids by herself. And she'd had glaucoma when she was a little girl, so she was legally blind.
Here? 6 kids? That's hard. That's hardcore.
The Shambhala house, that was her.
Oh, okay.
Modi.
Yeah. There was another house actually before that burned down. Most of the old houses here burned down. People did not have good luck with their fireplaces and their chimneys. So a lot of the old houses, they didn't continue. Bob King's house would be one of the older ones, and Kathy Lovato's, the one above the store, was the original land office for the town.
What are some of your earliest memories?
Coming here in the 80s, and basically just, it was almost like camping, for us. As close as our family ever got to camping was coming down here, staying over at Billy and Lee Hutchinson's place, that little red and white cabin thing. One of my scariest memories of sleeping. I was like 5 years old, hearing things outside and all that. But it was just playing with the deer, going to the sand dunes, being outside, trying not to step on cactus. And it was a lot of it. And just, having all the hummingbirds, which you just don't get used to. Lee had so many hummingbirds. And the deer that would just, come up and eat out of your hands. And for a city kid, that's a really strong memory.
So you got to meet a bunch of those old timers.
I did actually. Yeah, Bill, Gladys, Billy, Lee. My great-grandmother died 2 years before I was born, so I never got to meet her.
And who was that?
Modi Webb.
Okay.
But hanging out with my grandpa, I spent a lot of time hanging out with my grandpa.
Did he take you up in the hills?
He did a couple of times. He was a little old by then. When he moved back down here in the late 90s, he was getting a little bit up in age. But, driving anywhere, if he had to go to Saguache to get his tags renewed, we'd go together. And, about every half mile, he'd have a story about what happened at that half mile, almost rolling a Model T, or, all of a sudden something will pop out of his head. Like, I remember ice skating North Crestone, Like he used to ice skate North Crestone.
The creek?
And you
Yes,
could sled all the
exactly.
way down
Right.
to the very top.
Wow.
The
But,
water never went away.
yeah.
Anyways.
Well, people's wells were only 6 feet deep in the back. You know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It sounded like a different time. I remember him telling me that you could actually take a boat from here to Sawash.
I've heard that, but
I've seen it so filled with water out there. So I know maybe at some point it's possible where you just see half a yak head sticking up. Which is nice.
They, the water was after the Dust Bowl, which was very devastating down here, which is part of why everybody was so poor and hungry, and it's just the Depression and the Dust Bowl and everything happened. But prior to the Dust Bowl, there were lakes everywhere. My dad described incredible lakes, and I remember in the valley, you'd be driving along and there were artesian wells just shooting up, and in the winter they'd freeze. And so you'd be driving down the valley and there'd be all these like frozen fountain, beautiful ice fountains of the water. And we don't have that anymore. It really has changed.
And you were saying on the ranch that people couldn't go out there unless they were, well, you were saying that it was owned by a lot of wealthy people usually, but was Old Man Collins a wealthy guy, or did he just run it?
Collins was, so the Baca Ranch, in terms of ownership and everything, there were a number of corporations. Alfred Collins was an owner, and I don't recall the years. Jim McAlpin could tell you. He was an incredibly wealthy socialite from Philadelphia.
Oh.
One of his best friends was Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh.
They hunted all over the world with trophies, big game trophies. They were elitist and not very nice to the local people. The local people were the workers, the serf, kind of a serf. It was a very hierarchy, and Collins came from old money back east. So they had, that ranch was, they would use the local people. My father had a story of, there was a forest fire, and so he got all the younger kids to go up and fight fires and do all this stuff, and they were exhausted and hungry, and they got nothing for doing it. It was different. And when I was little, the only time I went on the ranch was to go with my uncle, Bill Sizemore, and I'd go with him to milk cows. And so I would go with him and go out to the barns because the cats were there and I loved animals. So, but that was the only time I got on the ranch. And so it was very exclusive it was owned. Now it was so amazing when the Baca developed the subdivision to drive out there and go, wow, this is all here. Who knew? It was different.
So talking to like my peer group around here and things, one of the subjects is that Crestone has like no middle class,
Mm-hmm.
There's like a lot of wealthy people out in the Baca, kind of stick to themselves, maybe vacation, they're here half the year. A lot of big properties, like if you look in the Century 21, the house listings, it's like 120, 160, 170, 160, and then 500, 600, 700. Does it kind of have that same feeling, you think?
I think there is some similarities, in terms of there isn't a big middle class here now or before.
Yeah.
And it's actually changed for the better in a lot of ways, in terms of the potential. The town without the Baca would have died. It would have become a little tiny ghost town, and you'd have a few cabins from old families, maybe that, somebody came up and visits twice a year or something, but the town would have disappeared.
It almost sounds like some old timers would be okay with that, though.
They would. I can tell you, many in my family, if they saw what their houses look like now, they would be very unhappy with some of that. But they were practical people, I think they would have taken the position as we do. We welcome people. Growth is inevitable. We're going to have it. The question is, how do we make it happen in a way that really protects and preserves what's so important here? And the environment, the just the whole, there's many things we need to be careful of, but we need to be careful and welcome people too. It can't be somebody comes in and says, okay, now I'm not letting anybody else in. And unfortunately, there are some people here that take that position, and I would hope that they would kind of open up their hearts and open up their ideas about the future. And instead of just saying, no, we don't want growth, we don't want tourists, we don't know, you need to say we welcome it, but it has to be done the right way.
Some of those unwelcoming people, I think, have only been here for like a year or two.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
They like to start the committees on community development right when they get here and then leave halfway before it does anything.
Yeah. I think fortitude is one of the greatest qualities that a person could have here.
It's tough to live here.
It isn't easy. And I think a lot of it is you have to be okay with yourself. There's a lot of time for you here. And if you're not okay, this won't be a place for people. And I think that's kind of always been true.
I find it ebbs and flows though. Like sometimes I'm not okay with myself and sometimes I am. Can y'all talk about Willie McDowell and who was his wife? Or Steve's mother?
Edith May.
You were asking me about Willie McDowell, who was another part of an old family. He came here as a very young boy from Kentucky, and he was the younger child. His father had died, and his stepfather was a fellow by the name of Clustermeyer. And if you look in some of the old pictures, like the old picture of the Crestone Mercantile, there's Clustermeyer there, and that was his stepfather. And Willie lived here his whole life, and he had a brother and two sisters. And like most families, Willie stayed, but the rest all kind of went different places. He worked for the county forever and did worked on a road grader and did that.
He stayed the whole time?
Yeah.
He's like the only one, right?
Of that family, he was one of the only ones. Yeah.
I mean,
there aren't that many people who stayed. You
no,
have
everybody,
Sean Homer, people like Jimmy. Jimmy was gone here, gone back. A lot of people did that. Very few people. Steve McDowell, Sean Homer. There's some of the few who actually grew up here and stayed here.
What about Bill and Gladys? I know Bill was, for the longest time, ran the mail truck all across the valley, so everybody knew him.
Everybody knew Bill. Bill and Gladys lived here virtually their whole lives. He was injured, very seriously injured, out on the ranch. Got caught in some kind of a machine, and several fingers were chewed up and whatever. He was very seriously injured. And then they moved to Moscow for a little while. But then they came back and eventually bought what became Kurt's store and now the Elephant Cloud.
Some of my memories of him, like, that was one of the first persons I've ever seen that only had, 3 fingers on one hand. It's not something you see all the time, but amazing golfer.
Amazing.
He won the golfing championship that they had every year here.
And he was an inventor.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things he did, he invented some kind of electric rod that he put into the ground, and earthworms would just fly out of the ground, and then he'd catch them and sell them to people who wanted to fish. But he was always inventing little things.
Used to whittle the cages with the balls inside from a solid piece. He used to make chains out of solid branches all the time.
Yeah, they carved.
Those little balancing guys used to
On nails.
On nails that just perpetually walk around on a little platform. You ever seen those?
And he had one of the biggest barbed wire collections in the country. Now it's in the Swatch Museum. But he worked out on the ranch. And they lived here always. Their Gladys's parents' house, which is not far from the Elephant Cloud, right up the street across from the new park, there's 4 great big pine trees. And those were planted, one for each child. And those people have been dead now for, the last one died maybe 15 years ago.
Are those
I take it back. But those were,
they're really obvious when you think about the story.
there's 4 great big pine trees.
Perfectly spaced apart in the front of the house.
like down Silver Street?
Yeah, right next to Fred.
Mm-hmm.
Just yeah, and that family, but all the kids left, and now their great-granddaughter owns that house. So it's funny how people kind of come back. I mean, it changes, but it stays the same a little bit. And certain family connections are very strong here.
So when I first came here, you had Billy, right? And then you had Bill.
Right.
And those guys were so different, but they exemplify like what Crestone's all about. Like Bill was ingenuitive, loved to just tinker, loved to talk.
Sweet.
Oh, so sweet. And then you had Billy, who maybe 5 words out of him.
In your entire life?
In my entire life, 5 words. He taught me how to use a bullwhip. That was nice. I always had really mean dogs.
Really mean dogs. Yeah.
But yeah, between those two, that was my memories of Crestone.
2 different uncles.
My 2 different uncles.
Was Bill was he the one that owned or ran the post office?
He had Kurt's store before it was Kurt's store. Before it was the Elephant Cloud. After it was my grandfather, and then what happened? There was a little tiny gas station. It was a Texaco station, and you can trust your car to the man that wears the star. Was their big theme, because Texaco had a star, and they all wore little hats. And there was a garage there, so there was a little car, minor car repair, and gas, and then a pop, and just really convenience, barely anything in there. And my grandfather started it, then my grandfather died, my Uncle Carl took it over, and then after he died, Bill took it over. And then there's 1 or 2 in between, and then Kurt, and now Benjamin and his wife. But it wasn't until very recently that there was really full service grocery and things like that here.
Did you know Pearl Henderson?
Pearl Henderson. I knew Pearl Hutchinson.
Hutchinson? Whitney was just telling me about Pearl, that the park is named after, Little Pearl Park. And she said Henderson, but...
Oh, Skip and Pearl. Yes. I'm sorry. There were actually 2 Pearls. No, very few people, but there were 2 Pearls. Yeah, they had the house where the Bliss is now, or the pub. Where are we at with that? They had a little house there. And Skip was a photographer for school children, and it was a summer house for them.
Oh, okay.
And they would come, and they had that land there.
Is that the house that got brought over to Lonnie's?
No.
Okay.
That was just a shed that
Okay.
Frank Snyder built.
Yeah.
It wasn't really old.
The story of how that shit is built is pretty funny.
It's a lot of things in town that have become sort of classic landmarks and historical weren't, but they kind of add character. But no, that was a recent thing. I don't know what happened. The house was probably torn down. The truth is, the people here, as I said, were very poor, and if you go into these houses, there's no foundation. These houses were so cold and old and burned easily. So there's really not much left of the original construction. And fire, of course, was the big one here. It just, people tended to get out because the houses were very small, but they just didn't last.
Did you go up in the mine shafts when you were a kid?
I probably wasn't allowed too far out that way. Most of my time was going out on Billy's land and things like that.
And watching for bulls. My uncle had the meanest bulls, and you'd be walking in a field and there would be a bull, and you'd have to get out of there quickly.
There's more stuff like that. Yeah, there's they definitely blocked up as many as they could. There's still a few nice open ones out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mines up there.
The Independence mine I was in once, and it was amazing.
That's different,
Oh
seeing
my
that
God.
area now.
But you didn't have access to any of that.
Which one is the Independence mine?
That's where
It's a
Shoe
shoemaker.
is.
Oh, okay.
That was the Independence mine was the big gold mine that functioned for a short time.
Oh, and then I guess Jim McAlpin was saying they used to do tours into that or up there.
I'm not aware of that, but it's a fascinating when you think of those guys working in there, it would be challenging. After that mine closed, though, a lot of the miners here in town, for a brief time, went to like Idaho Springs and to other mines, because when that mine shut down, they had no work. And they still continued to live here, but they went to Idaho Springs and places and worked in the mines until more started happening on the ranch. And they came back and worked on the ranch.
Did you know Toots?
No.
She died before.
Yeah.
She was a character. Jimmy and Sean can tell you all about it. She was once interviewed for the New York Times.
What?
Yeah, I'll have to find it for you. There's an article somewhere, and she's quoted in it. You're just thinking New York Times and Toots. That's funny.
Did you know her?
Yeah.
Well?
I was just little. I don't remember. Jimmy can tell you when she died. But she and my grandmother were great friends. But a lot of the older people here were very different. Just kind of, they were very independent. Not always real friendly, if you didn't know them. But they had hard lives, and they were and the women were very, I didn't know women had issues over power or anything when I was little, because these women were powerful, strong women. And they'd been through a lot, and a lot of them didn't have husbands. A lot of them had lost husbands early, so they were very independent and pretty fierce, actually. Toots was really fierce.
Do you have any of your grandma's corncob pipes?
Great-grandma? No, I don't think so. My great-grandmother was Nancy Jane Hancock, who was a grandniece or great-grandniece of John Hancock, who signed the Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence. And they were in Hooper. And she smoked a corncob pipe and was just an incredible little character. But so people were here from all over the country, and this is back in the beginning of the 1900s.
And if people were coming here in the late 1800s and early 1900s, do you think they were coming for mining or for cattle or for adventure?
That's a question I wish I had asked a lot of people who are in Alkaline, because I'm not exactly sure why they came. They came in kind of family groups, and for whatever reason needed to leave where they were. And a lot of them came from Missouri and the Ozarks. A lot of people came from that part of the country here. And the draw, I'm not exactly sure what it was, because they didn't necessarily work in mining back then. So I honestly don't know. Although if you ask Jimmy Homer, ask somebody in that next generation, they might know better.
Mm-hmm. Are you remembering any good ones? Questions?
Mostly about just you being a small kid here. How different was it, you think, for you coming here when you were, say, 12, compared to me being here when I was 12? I think we kind of had a similar experience, honestly.
The reality is, I think it wasn't much different. Then. It would be different now. But between here...
Which would have been the early 90s.
From the 60s to the 90s, probably not a whole lot of difference. I think now the electronic age is immeasurable in terms of how it's affected children and being in this community, or any community. But I'm not sure it would be specific to here. It's just... but in terms of being a young teenager, and for me or for you, it would have been really nice.
I don't remember seeing like another person at the sand dunes. Whenever we'd go there, it'd be pretty sparse. There wouldn't be anybody there. Now you go there, right? The parking lot is absolutely packed.
Or you can't get in.
Yeah. So, yeah.
But it was just hanging out and being creative and hiking and being outside, and the water. Water was a huge fascination, of course. And but there was, you had your imagination, and a sibling or a friend, and that's what you had. And it was wonderful. I mean, it was a great way to grow up.
How do you see it being in 50 years? I mean,
That's a tricky question. That's a really hard question. I don't know. I think the growth of technology is going to be such a factor in the future, and what that means for kids. When I look at my grandchildren who come down now, they can be connecting with their friends wherever they are, and they're playing video games, and they're doing all this stuff, and the environment doesn't matter where they are. They could be anywhere. They could be here. They could be I was in Tibet a few years back, and it looks just like the valley, But you could be here. You could be there. You could be doing anything, anywhere, and it doesn't matter. The environment, unfortunately, matters less and less.
You have a lot of people worrying about this place becoming, another Aspen, Carbondale, Telluride, something like that. I mean, you even see that being possible.
I think the fact that we can't ski here is sort of a blessing, because if you could ski here, there's no question that it would become that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it doesn't have quite the appeal to the people with the big money. Aspen, Telluride, the incredible mountains, and there's so many things to do year round with the skiing and the boating and all this stuff. The fact that we're a high mountain desert and the fact that there's no skiing will probably help preserve the area. But it will change, and I think it's going to be a big challenge to your generation and the one that follows to see how we make those changes, to see if we can really do it and protect and preserve what's so important here. And that won't be easy.
No.
And it's not easy because the Front Range is getting so expensive that we're getting a lot of people from the Front Range. And we've got to figure out how we're going to absorb them and protect what's important.
And you say protect what's important, so how you see it in 50 years is one thing, but how do you want to see it in 50 years, and what is so important to protect?
Well, I think the environment and preserving and protecting just the natural environment that we have is number one. I think the growth has to be, you have to decide where you want the growth. You're going to have growth. Are you going to let it just sprawl everywhere? Are you going to try to confine it? I think, I sort of lost your question in there, and I'm sorry.
How do you want to see Crestone?
I think you just keep, a lot of it is the same. You keep it the same. You keep values. You keep the importance of family. You keep the beauty of the environment. You keep the acceptance of diversity. Those things are things that are going to be really important to keep. And I think we can. But I think as anybody in this, we have to work at it too. It doesn't just automatically happen. And I think more and more we need to make sure that we have services here. That's going to be a challenge. We're going to have to make sure we have some mental health services, that we have services for people who, poverty-stricken people, medical care. There's a lot of challenges in the next 50 years that we're going to need to make sure that we're creating sort of a safety network for the people that come here.
Why do you think this project that we're doing here is of value?
I can't quite put the saying together, but basically, if you don't know the past, you'll repeat the mistakes. You have to kind of appreciate and understand where we came from in order to know where to go, and to know where not to go too. It's very important to know how we got here and who we are, whether it's biological or just that you're here now. It's really important to really appreciate what created this, and so that you can find your place in it and then perpetuate it.
Funny question. What brought you to Crestone? I mean, it's never really been known, and even now, it's what brought you to Crestone.
Yeah.
So many people. How'd you even hear about it? I mean, what made you decide to just take that leap? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge question.
It's
And then
so diverse.
some of you guys
It
had
just kind
family
of
here.
happens.
Yeah.
I mean, like for us, I think
It was
that's,
business
I understand
opportunity
with
for
us.
us.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
For us, I understand. It's like, oh, let's just go back. You know, that's very different than
Oh, yeah.
going there. Going back is different than going originally.
Why did you come back?
I had done what I needed to do somewhere else. You know, I had been a lawyer. I was successful. I did the big city and the president of the bar association and all that stuff. And I realized it wasn't really making me happy. I needed something different. I didn't need a glitzy car and a big house and a law practice. I needed something more basic. And you get it here.
Like a grocery store and a Jeep?
Well, that was a mistake. That was a mistake.
Yeah, because you work, I think we all work harder here than we ever did when we had
That's
a lawn and a, you know.
That's right. But there's something you get back, and I think it's not a tangible thing. I mean, it's hard to describe. If this place works for you, it's wonderful. And if it doesn't work, people come and go a lot here.
And there's like more opportunity here compared to the city where, the city where I grew up, I couldn't afford a house there now at all. I would have to work in one job and would be really afraid to leave that job based on the expenses of living in a city. So, I mean, that's the draw here. You can do what you want to do. You can change.
You can still buy land and build
You can
your
still
own
buy
home
land.
and have a family and live in a pretty safe place. You know, there's a lot of benefit.
And a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to bring company down every once in a while that's never been here, and then that really helps you
It
appreciate
reminds
it.
you.
Yeah.
That's right.
You just
It does.
watch them step outside, and then, and then you're like, all right. Yeah, it's on here. Or get stuck in a traffic jam in Denver for
That's
an
right.
hour, and then you'll really miss here.
It's true. Absolutely. I like having no stoplights in the county. When that first one goes in, it's going to be kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't miss emissions testing. That was a pain.
Oh, yeah.
Old card. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't imagine where the first stoplight will go.
So watch somewhere.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that was wonderful. I would ask advice for newcomers, but I feel like you've hit on that a lot already. Do you have any?
There's so much covered.
I know we got to get Johnny in here too. Do you have any thoughts or questions?
No, I really appreciate you doing this. I think it's wonderful. I wish we had done it about 20 years ago with that group that's no
Yeah,
longer with
me
us.
too.
But they're gone, and this is so much better than not at all.
Uh-huh.
It's great.
My question was, when you're talking about, how to manage the growth, I guess I'm curious about specifics, like
See,
very
I didn't quite hear you.
specific.
So how to manage growth?
Yeah,
There's some
like the
specifics.
specific things, because you were kind of broad in general, but I mean, like, what do you do legally, or how do you keep people in a certain place, or how do you, like, bring only certain people in and not the people you don't want? Like, how do you manage growth?
I think the main thing you do is through things like city government and the POA and things like that. You need to decide, where is your commercial area? What kind of commercial stuff do you want? Where's your residential? How dense is it? There's a lot of planning that's very critical. A master plan for this part of the valley is critical as to where is growth going to be. That, in a sense, limits things. If you only have certain areas for housing, then if people can't do housing there, they don't come. I think you can't just say we only want rich people, we only want poor people, or any of that kind of stuff. But when you create the environment, the truth is the people that are appropriate for that environment will come and stay, or come and not stay if it's not the right environment. So a lot of it has to do with just setting up a healthy, community. I think we're failing our old people right now, and we're failing our children right now. We really need to work on like track 1 and get rec center, get performing arts centers, kind of do some of that cultural stuff that enriches, and we want people who come here who want that. And so in a way, it's kind of, if you create it, they will come. I don't think there's any hard, fast rule. But I think if you just let, like what's happening in Saguache County right now by lazy KV, it's not a good thing. That is not the growth you want. And what we wouldn't want is to have that over here. And we want to make sure, you need to make sure that you have a master plan and things legally set up so that that kind of, I'm living in my camper with no water and no sewer and no anything, it just doesn't just pop up everywhere. And that's going to be a challenge for Crestone, because Crestone has a different idea, I think, about how we should be than some of the rest of Saguache County. So it's more of a, it may sound really vague, but I think it's more of a create the right environment and you'll attract the right people.
And along those lines, you and Steve have already given so much to provide services, and Matt, Best Meat Department in Colorado. So your family, the three of you, have already given so much to provide services and help direct or guide some of that growth. Do you have more in you? Because I don't feel like we could do it without that perspective.
Another business, no.
Yeah, no, we're
No,
kind of
community-
business is
One of the things
development.
we wanted to do was actually, when we first were thinking about what to do here, the store was just an afterthought. Actually,
that was like a, what were we thinking?
yeah, with the grocery store, but we were going to do low-income housing. We were going to do an 8-plex.
Or 10.
It was 8.
8, okay.
In a high-density place where it'd be like affordable. But then you'd need the jobs for the person to support that. So it's like,
So you made the grocery store.
so yeah, the grocery store. Yeah, we kind of got bogged down
We got bogged down.
with the restaurants.
But that is one of the things that we still have the plans approved by the town, actually, up by the school to do. And when we say low-income housing, it's low-income because we choose to make it that way, not like through government things. I think the more our town takes care of itself through private enterprise, the better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we have some energy for it, but it takes people kind of getting on track, and we're a little, we're not real cohesive in this community. A lot of people with good ideas, but they think theirs is right, and they're not real willing to kind of, let's compromise, let's figure this out. I think that's true of our country and our world in general right now, but I think as a small town, we should have the opportunity to change that and just say, we don't care that they're in disarray nationally. Let's just fix what's here. Let's make it work for our young people, make it work for our older people, make sure there's housing, and we can do that. And I think working together, then nobody, bears the burden of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more business opportunity in Crestone for when we first moved here. So, so many other people are picking up the baton, carrying on with it.
Yeah, that's true.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're doing this.
Me too.